Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hi, welcome to the lecture on exercises in R programming. In this lecture, we are going to solve a few exercises in R programming. We have few problems that will be discussed in this session. In this lecture, I have used Jupyter Notebook in order to show you the problem statement and as well as the solution to each exercises. All the codes used in this lecture can also be executed using RStudio. So now let's get started with the first problem. The first problem is to create a 16 by 16 matrix called MyMat, which will range from 1 to 256 row wise. Use nested loops to iterate through rows and columns to perform the following operations. The first subproblem is to print the index of those values that are divisible by 3. Before the index is printed, print the string value at following index is divisible by 3. The next subproblem is to identify the values divisible by 5 and set them to 0. The third subproblem is to provide the row sums and column sums of the matrix obtained after using the nested loop. Before getting into solving the first subproblem, we first need to create a 16 by 16 matrix with values ranging from 1 to 256. So the first thing that we are doing is the matrix creation. So in order to create a matrix, we can use the function called matrix, and the first argument is nothing but the data, where I have given the sequence of values using a colon, that is from 1 to 256, and I have also specified the number of rows as 16 and number of columns as 16, and I have also given by row is equal to true in order to get the values of the matrix arranged row wise, and I have also saved the output to a variable called mymat, and I am printing the mymat. So this is the output that we are getting. So you can see there are 16 rows and 16 columns. Till 13th column it is displayed here, and from 14th column onwards you can see below, right. So you have the values from 1 to 256 and all the values are arranged row wise. It means that once you give by rows equal to true, it will start filling up the matrix in each column, and once you come to the 16th column, the next set of values will be arranged in the next row. So that is what we mean by creating a matrix row wise. Now we have created a matrix. Now let's get into the first subproblem. First subproblem is to print the index of those values divisible by 3, and also before printing the index we have to give the statement called value at following index is divisible by 3. So now let's see how to do this. So we are going to use nested loop to perform the operations A, B and C. Nested loop is nothing but the placing of one loop inside the body of the another loop is called nesting. So when you nest two loops, the outer loop takes control of the number of complete repetitions of the inner loop, and thus inner loop is executed n times for every execution of outer loop. For example, here we have created a nested for loop, since we have a for loop inside the body of another for loop, right. So we have the first for loop, here I is the index variable in the sequence 1 to 16. So we have 16 I values to loop through, and also we have 16 j values to loop through. So basically the first subproblem is to identify the index of the values which are divisible by 3, correct. So in that case, so in the first iteration I will take a value of 1 and j will take a value from 1 to 16. So in the first iteration it will check in each column which values will be divisible by 3, and we are basically looking at fetching the index of the value which are divisible by 3. So ideally in the first iteration we should be getting the index as 1, 3 followed by 1, 6, 1, 9 and followed by 1, 12, right. So now let's see how to do that. So inside the for loop I am giving the if condition where each and every values of my matrix will be divided by 3, and if the remainder is equal to 0, then we are going to print the following statement called value at following index is divisible by 3, and we are also printing the row index and the column index. So I will fetch you the row index of that particular value and J will fetch you the column index of that particular value. So you will basically end up getting the index of all the values which are divisible by 3. So that is the first part of the problem. The second part of the problem is to basically look for all the values and see which are divisible by 5. If it's divisible by 5, then set them to 0. So that is what the second problem is about. So inside the same for loop itself, I am giving another condition using the if statement. So the condition here is the values of my matrix will be divided by 5 and it will check whether the remainder is equal to 0 or not. When the remainder is 0, it means that the particular value is divisible by 5 and we are going to fetch that value and we are going to set them to 0. So that is what the if condition tells you. This will be repeated for each and every values of I here. In the first iteration, we would have finished the first row for all the column values. In the second iteration, we would have gone to the second I value, that is row 2, and we would have done the same operation for all the column values till 16. So once you do that, we are printing the my matrix in order to see whether we've set all the values which are divisible by 5 to 0 or not. You can see the output here. For the first condition, that is wherever the value is divisible by 3, we are basically getting the index of those particular value. So before getting the index, we are also printing a string called value at following index is divisible by 3. As I said earlier, so 1 comma 3 means a value correspond to first row and the third column, which is 3. Yes, it is divisible by 3. So that's why we have got the output as 1, 3. Similarly, you will be able to see the index for all the values which are divisible by 3. So this is the output for the second if statement, where we have checked if the value is divisible by 5, we have set them to 0. So in the first row, the value corresponding to first row, the fifth column has been set to 0 since that value is divisible by 5. Correspondingly, you will have other values which are divisible by 5 have been set to 0. So third subproblem is to calculate the row sum and print it. So here also we are going to use the same nested for loop. So here I will take the values from the first row till the number of rows of the my matrix, and inside the block statement we are initializing the R sum to 0, and next we are creating a for loop inside the outer for loop where J will take the values from the first column till the number of columns of the my matrix, right. So inside that we are giving the block of statement to be executed, that is we are basically going to get the sum of all the values row wise. In the first iteration, the I value is 1 and the J value is equal to 1 to 16. In the first iteration, basically what we will get means sum of all values of the row 1, and the second iteration you will basically get the sum of all values of row 2 since I value will be 2. So now let us see if that is what we will be getting when we print the row sum. Because I have given the statement to be executed here, where we are basically going to update the row sum value, which will be starting from 0. We have just initialized that to 0. Also, I am printing the row sum. This is the sum of values in the first row, second row, third row. So similarly, you will get it for all 16 rows. Now let us try to calculate the column sum and print it. It is exactly similar to what we have seen, but instead of giving my mat I comma j, we will be swapping the index variables so that it will go column wise, so that you will get the column sums. The output basically shows you the sum of all values column wise. So 1501 is the sum of all values in the first column. This is for the second column, third column, and you will get it for all the 16 columns of your matrix. So now we have seen how to create a 16 by 16 matrix using the function called matrix, and we've also seen how to arrange the values row wise, and we've also seen how to use the nested loops to iterate through the rows and columns to perform the operations like printing the index of the values which are divisible by 3, and we've seen how to identify the values which are divisible by a particular number and set them to a different value, and we've also provided the row sums and column sums of the matrix obtained after performing all the operations given in the A and B subproblems. Now let's go ahead and see the second problem. So the second problem is to use dataset Titanic, which is inbuilt in R. This dataset provides information on the fate of passengers on the fatal maiden voyage of the ocean liner Titanic, summarized according to economic status, which is nothing but the class in which the passengers have traveled, sex of the passengers, age and survival status. And we are asked to store the data in another data frame called DF. So the first subproblem is to write a single command which will convert the categories adult and child to the strings 1 and 2 in the data frame DF, and we have been provided with 3 sets of tools. The first one is the apply family of functions, where we can choose the right type of apply function here from apply, lapply and sapply. Basically we have to choose the correct apply function which can be used to solve the given problem. And the next tool is if-else function. This is basically a vectorized form of the if-else construct, and we can also make use of the inline function. So we will see what all these 3 functions are and how to use them to basically solve the subproblem A. So first let's load the inbuilt Titanic dataset. In order to load any inbuilt data frame in R, we can use the command called data.frame. Inside the function, we just need to provide the data frame name if we know a priori, and the second argument is string as factors is equal to false, because we are going to keep them as strings, because by default once you read the string values in R, it will be converted to factor which will be locked. Even if you want to change any levels of the existing variable, you won't be able to do that. So it's a best practice to always set strings as factors is equal to false, and while loading itself I'm saving that to a variable called df. So df is our new data frame which has the details of the Titanic passengers. I'm also printing the df data frame in order to see the data set. So we have basically 32 observations and 5 columns. The first column is the class, which depicts the class in which the passengers have travelled, the first class, second class, third class and the crew members. And the sex basically contains the sex of the passengers, male or female. Age basically doesn't give you exact age of the passengers, rather it gives you whether that passenger is a child or adult. Next is the survived. Survived variable tells you the status of the passenger, whether they survived or not. Next, frequency column gives you how many passengers were there in this particular category. So now let's go ahead and try to solve the problem. Basically we are going to convert the categories adult and child to strings 1 and 2. So it's still going to be the string value, but instead of adult and child, we are just going to convert them to 1 and 2. You can also keep them as numbers if you want. So like I said, we can make use of the apply family of functions in order to solve this problem. So we are going to use a function called sapply. So let me just take you through what sapply means. Basically the sapply function takes list, vector or data frame as input and gives output in vector or matrix. And it's useful for operations on list objects and returns a list object of same length of original set. sapply function is similar to lapply function. The only difference is that this function returns a vector. And how to use this function? Basically you can have 2 arguments. The first argument is a vector or a list which can be appropriate to call to supply. The next one is the function applied to each element of x. So we can always use the user defined function or the inbuilt functions that are available in R. So now let's see how to use this to basically convert the categories adult and child to strings 1 and 2. So I'm using the sapply function. As I mentioned earlier, the first argument should be the x, that is nothing but a vector. I am accessing age from the data frame df, and I am also defining a function using the inline function, and using the if-else inline function I am going to give a condition. Like I can give a test expression. That text expression will be validated. If it is true, then second argument is x, so the expression given in the x will be returned, otherwise the expression given as a y argument will be returned. So for example, for all the values of age variable in the data frame df, I am going to check if age is equal to adult, then it will be replaced with 1, otherwise it will be replaced with 2. We have only 2 levels here, one is adult, the other one is child. So if it is adult, it will be returned as 1, if not it will be child, so it will be returned as 2. And then we're also printing the age variable after doing these operations. All the child category has been converted to string 2 and all the adult categories have been converted to string 1. So now we solve the first subproblem, that is A. Now let's move on to the second subproblem. So second subproblem is to create 4 subsets from the data based on the class. So the class basically has 4 levels to it, that is first class passenger, second class passenger, third class passengers and the crew members. So we are going to subset based on the class and we are going to store the subsets in data frame in different name, df1, df2, df3 and dfc appropriately. Now let's see how to subset the data based on the given condition. Right? You can use the subset function in order to subset the rows. So the first argument should be the data frame name, that is df. The second argument should be the condition. So here class is the variable name and I am checking wherever the class variable has first as value, then I am going to save all those rows to a new data frame called df1. So basically it means that we are subsetting the first class passengers and saving it to df1, and we are also doing the same thing for other class passengers, like for second class passengers, third class passengers and for the crew members. So now I have 4 different data frames which has the details of passengers class wise. So now let's move ahead and see why we've done this. So based on the previous data frames, we have to find the fraction of males in total males and fraction of females in total females who survived in the respective class data frames. And also we are going to find which class has the best survival fraction when both female and male passengers are considered. So first let's see what we have in df1. So basically we have all the details of the first class passengers. You can see under class you have only first, right? So now we are clear with what df1 has. Now we are going to find out the data type of each variables in df1. So you can check the data type of each variable using str function, and inside which you just need to give the data frame name. So I am giving str df1. So classes of factor with 4 levels, first, second, third, and crew. Next is sex with factor 2 levels, male and female. Next is age, which is a character variable. It has some values 2 and 1. And next is the survived, which will have 2 levels to it with factor as the type, no and s. Next is the frequency, which basically depicts the number of passengers in each category. Data type of frequency is number. So now let's try to solve the problem. Basically first class has both male and female passengers. We are going to find the fraction of male passengers from total males who survived in the first class. So in order to do that, we are going to use the df1 data frame. We need to first find out how many male passengers were there in the first class. This is the first condition. I am going to give a condition wherever the sex is equal to male. 5 is nothing but the 5th variable, which is frequency 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So basically I need all the rows wherever the sex is male as well as the 5th column, so that it will give me how many male passengers were there. And I am storing that to a variable called total male passengers in first class. Now we got sum of all occurrences of males. So now we need to find out how many of the male passengers have survived. In order to do that, I will be applying 2 conditions, and both the conditions have to be satisfied in order to get the rows. So the first condition is male and the second condition is the survived status should be S, and I am also getting the frequency of it. I am saving that to a variable called survived male passenger in first class. We've got how many male passengers were there in first class, and we've also got how many of them survived. So in order to get the fraction of male passengers from total males who survived, you can basically divide the survived male passengers in first class by the total male passengers in first class. And I'm also using the paste function in order to use the string before printing the value. This is the print statement. Fraction of male passengers from total males who survived in first class. And I'm rounding off whatever value that I'm going to get from this variable to 2 decimal places. So once you execute this, you'll be able to see the fraction of male passengers from total males who survived in first class is 0.34. Similarly, you can get the same information for the female passengers as well. So what we have to do first, we have to first collect the sum of all occurrences of female. Basically, wherever the sex is equal to female, we need the frequency, right? So it basically tells you how many female passengers were there in the first class. And then we have to see how many of them survived, correct? Both the conditions should be satisfied, like we are subsetting wherever the sex is female, that is wherever the female passengers are there, as well as survived should be S. We will be basically getting the number of female passengers who survived, and we have stored that to someone Fs, right? So in order to get the fraction of females from the total females who survived, I can just divide the survived female passengers in first by total female passengers in the first class. So once I do that, I'll be able to get the output, that is 0.97. Out of all male in the first class passengers, the fraction of male passengers who survived was 0.34, and out of all female passengers in the first class, the fraction of female passengers who survived was 0.97. Similarly, we have to get the fraction of males who survived in second class and fraction of females who survived in the second class, and similarly for all the other classes also. You can use the same code, but you just need to replace the data frame with df2 for second class, df3 for third class, and for crew members you can use the df_c data frame. I've just replaced the data frame 1 with data frame 2 in order to get the results for the second class passengers. And I'm just executing this, where you can see the output as fraction of male passengers from total males who survived in second class is 0.14, and the fraction of female passengers from total females who survived in second class is 0.88, which is actually comparatively lesser than the first class passengers, because it was 0.34, 0.97, it is only 0.14 and 0.88 here. So similarly, I have done it for the third class passengers as well, with replacing data frame 2 with data frame 3, and here we have the details, like, so the survival fraction of male passengers was 0.17 and the survival fraction of female passengers was 0.46, which is slightly lesser fraction than the second class passengers for female. So the next thing is the survival fraction of the Titanic crew. So we have another data frame where we have the details of the crew members. So we're going to look at the same fraction details. Like, instead of using df3, I've used dfc basically in order to get the fraction rate for female and male. Once you execute this, you'll be able to look at the fraction of male crew members who survived is 0.46 and the fraction of female crew members who survived is 0.87. So from the analysis, we found out that the first class passengers have the highest survival rates when both female and male passengers are concerned. So with this, we've solved the second problem, that is basically to find out the class which has the best survival fraction when both female and male passengers were concerned. So we've also solved that, and we found out that the first class has the highest survival fraction rate for both female and male. So now we've come to the end of the lecture. In this lecture, we've seen how to solve a problem using R programming, and we've seen two different problems. One is using the nested for loop, where we've seen how to use the nested for loop and in which scenario we'll be using that. The second problem is to use the data set and try to answer some of the problems that were given in the question, and we've solved them using R programming. Thank you.